Welcome back to Refuel. Tonight we are going to finish the poetic books, which include the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Tonight we're going to look at Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs. So let's jump right into it with the video on Proverbs. Meryl?
There are 3 books in the Bible that have come to be called the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job.
And all of these books are addressing the same set of questions. What kind of world are we living in? And what does it look like to live well in this world?
So, how to be good at life.
Yeah. So each of these books tackles these questions from a unique perspective, and it's important to understand all of them to get a fully biblical perspective on the good life. So as a thought experiment, you could actually imagine each of these books as a person. So Proverbs would be like this brilliant young teacher, and Ecclesiastes the sharp middle-aged critic, and Job would be this weathered old man who's seen a lot in his day.
We're going to start by meeting the book of Proverbs, the brilliant young teacher. And she's not just smart, she's smart about everything: work, relationships, sex, spirituality. She has incredible insights, things you wouldn't see on your own.
Yeah, she would be the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific advice.
So what makes her so smart?
Well, Proverbs can see things that most people don't see. She believes that there's an invisible creative force in the universe that can guide people in how they should live. And you can't see it, just like you can't see gravity, but it affects everything that we do.
So what's this force?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called chokhmah, and it usually gets translated into English as wisdom. It's an attribute of God that God used to create the world. And chokhmah has been woven into the fabric of things and how they work. So wherever people are making good or just or wise decisions, they're tapping into chokhmah.
And whenever someone's making a bad decision, they're working against chokhmah.
Right, or as it says in Proverbs chapter 1, the waywardness of fools will destroy them, but the one who listens to wisdom lives in security.
So it's like a moral law of the universe.
Yeah, it's a cause-effect pattern, and no one can escape it. And Proverbs personifies all of this as a woman.
Yeah, Lady Wisdom.
Right, and she roams around the earth, calling out, making herself available to anyone who's willing to listen to her and to learn. Which leads to the second thing Proverbs believes, that anyone can access and interact with wisdom and use it to make a beautiful life for yourself or for others.
You can create with it like a designer.
Yes, in fact, chokhmah in Hebrew isn't simply intellectual knowledge. The word is also used to describe a skilled artisan who excels at their craft, like woodworking or stonemasonry. So you show you possess chokhmah when you put it to work and develop the skill of making a good life.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's do this. Let's go find some wisdom.
But before you do, Proverbs has one more really important thing to consider. Chokhmah isn't some impersonal force. It's an attribute of God himself. And so in Hebrew thought, your journey to becoming wise has to begin with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. It's this healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And true wisdom means learning those boundary lines and not crossing them.
Now, all those ideas you just unpacked are in chapters 1 through 9 in Proverbs. But when I think of the book of Proverbs, I think of the collection of sayings, the Proverbs themselves. Tell me about those.
Yeah, those are what you find in chapters 10 on to the end of the book. It's a collection of hundreds and hundreds of proverbs about any and all aspects of life. And chokhmah gets applied to them, resulting in this wise guidance to help you find a path towards success, and no matter what you do.
If I design my life with these sayings, life is going to be good.
Yeah, or as Proverbs puts it, it'll give health to your bones, prosperity, a long, rich life.
Which is a really big claim.
But you can see how it's often the case. Wise people, they tend to do better. Things usually work out well for them in life. And so that is the promise and the wisdom of the book of Proverbs.
The book of Proverbs is really beautiful, but if we take a step back, some people would argue it's a little too simplistic, because sometimes horrible things happen to really wise people, and sometimes foolish people get rewarded. It doesn't always work the way we think it should work.
That's right, which is why we need to go and listen to our next wise friend, Ecclesiastes the critic, because he's wrestled with that very problem, and he's going to push us further in our journey to find the good life.
Again, reminding you, as we said before, we're going through these books in a different sequence that they're presenting them in this study because I chose to give them to you in the order we have them in our Bible. They're using a different sequence. So if you were here last week, you know we looked at Job last week, which is actually the third book as they present the wisdom sequence, and tonight we're going to look at the first two. And as they alluded to near the end of the video, as we go from Proverbs to Ecclesiastes, we're going to see both are dealing with wisdom, but they deal with a different perspective. So as we go through first Proverbs, keep that in mind and carry it with you then as we look at Ecclesiastes. But first, Proverbs. So as they intro here, because they consider Proverbs the first of the three books of wisdom, or the wisdom literature, we see that it deals with, in general, the wisdom literature. It's addressing the kind of world that we're living in and what it looks like, or how we seek the way to live well in this world. So it deals with what does it look like to live well in this world. How can we be good at doing life, or looking at it another way, how do we find the good life? So that's kind of what the book is leading to. Now, in the book of Proverbs, and the author, the study notes I have say there are different people who contributed to the book of Proverbs, but predominantly it's King Solomon that is attributed to having written the book of Proverbs. So in this book, it talks about wisdom, it introduces us to wisdom, and the author personifies wisdom. Now, how do they personify it in the book of Proverbs? How is wisdom illustrated? As what? As a woman, okay? It's given a feminine attribute. It is lady wisdom as we work through the book of wisdom. And what is her expertise? What is she wise in? Everything, all aspects of life. So as we follow this lady wisdom through the book of Proverbs, it covers all aspects of our lives. And as they said, books 1 through 9 talk about wisdom, chapters 1 through 9. Chapters 10 to the end of the book are the actual wisdom sayings, all short verses, or a collection of verses with a tidbit of wisdom in each one. And they cover everything. So she is wise in everything. And who is she available to? Everyone, specifically anyone that will call out to her. So it's there for all of us to appeal to seek, and to be found if we call out and we make the effort to seek her. So if you have the questions, look at question 1. We've just described how she is personified, but in this video, how are they defining wisdom? What is wisdom?
An attribute of God.
Okay, that's the important characteristic they want us to take from the beginning. It is an unseen force, but it is not an impersonal force. It is, in fact, an attribute of the living God. And as they opened up the video, where do we first see wisdom as an attribute of God applied? From the very beginning, from the creation. It says this is the attribute of God that he utilized in creating the universe, the physical world, And as a result, all of creation and human beings as the apex of the creation. So the idea is that wisdom is woven into the creation by the hand of God, intentionally, directly, because it is an attribute of God. So therefore, we, as that apex of creation, with free will, what does it say about our decision making? If we make good decisions, what are we doing? You remember what they said? People picking the fruit from the tree.
You're choosing to live by the laws that God has put out.
Okay. If you make good decisions, you are in fact doing good. You're tapping into God's wisdom, woven into the creation, available to us. Okay, and I'm going to get to the other part of what you said in a moment. And the converse of that is if we make bad decisions, we're working against wisdom. And keep in mind, that means we're working against God, because wisdom is an attribute, a character attribute of the living God. So, the rest of what Louise was saying, we therefore, our decision making, as it applies to wisdom, determines our obedience or our rebellion to what? God and his law. So if it's a matter of wisdom or a lack of wisdom, choosing wisdom or choosing against wisdom, God's wisdom woven into the creation becomes a moral law. A universal law or a relative law? Universal. We don't get to make the law, amend the law, challenge the law, and still be in good standing with God and taking advantage of the wisdom he makes available to us. So through this idea of wisdom being an attribute of God and woven into the creation, we see that there is a moral law within the universe that is set and established. Okay? Another important feature of our faith that we saw from the beginning in the garden when we see the first sin, right? That was a choice. And that was a bad choice. So it was a choice against God's wisdom, because what the man and the woman were being enticed to do by the serpent, enticed but not forced, their choice, was what? To define good and evil for themselves, instead of accepting God's definition, that universal definition that God wove into the universe. So the idea of moral relativity, where what's good for you is good for you, what's good for me is good for me, and we all just agree to accept that, very much a secular, worldly notion, but not a godly notion. It's no part of what God gives us, right? And being an impersonal force, and being an attribute of God, where does the book of Proverbs, and they brought it out in the video, where does that search for wisdom begin? And the reference would be Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. In the beginning, but when we search for wisdom, what's our starting point? Go ahead and look up chapter 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord. We can't seek wisdom without first fearing the Lord. And if we start earlier in Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 7, we see that the fear of the Lord is not only the beginning of wisdom, it's the beginning of knowledge. Two words which are associated, but they are not the same thing. What's the difference? What is knowledge? What is wisdom? What do you think?
Well, like they said, wisdom is when you have a craftsman who fine-tunes his skill.
Okay, so in here they use the analogy of wisdom being a craftsman who fine-tunes his skills. So what is knowledge?
You know about it.
The skill. It's what you know. Knowledge is the raw facts, which we can learn, which we can assimilate, which we can take in. So if knowledge is the raw facts, how do you describe wisdom? Yes. That's applying it. Applying the knowledge. How do you apply it? How do you express it out into your life? That's wisdom, and that's the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. Okay? So if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of both wisdom and knowledge, question 2, let's look at that. How is that phrase, fear of the Lord, defined in this video? How do you define the fear of the Lord?
Like they said, it's a healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil.
Okay. The fear of the Lord is a healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And again, reference back to the opening chapters of Genesis, the garden, the tree of knowledge, that the man and the woman was not supposed to eat from. Was it so because God did not want them to have knowledge? No, if we look at what we're talking about is this progression of wisdom and where wisdom started, it's so that they don't take and run with the notion of defining it themselves. It was a matter of honor and respect to not eat of that tree, but to accept God's definition. So that is the fear of the Lord, a respect for God's definition of good and evil, wisdom or the lack of wisdom. And if wisdom is an attribute of the living God, then when we seek wisdom, we're seeking God. Okay? Questions? Comments? It comes down this search for wisdom and acknowledgement of wisdom as an attribute of God, in practical terms, is us learning God's boundary lines. And then the fear of the Lord is not only learning them, but not crossing them. It's being obedient. And as they said, Proverbs chapter 10 to the end of the book is the actual wisdom sayings, emphasizing again, and if and I hope you will on your own read through them, they cover everything. Being wealthy, being poor, being hungry, being full. I mean, all the aspects of our life that we all deal with are covered in that book of wisdom with wisdom sayings of what God is presenting us. And
In the video, they said, they spoke of it as cause and effect.
yes.
If you do this, this will happen. If you live well, you should, if you listen, you should live well.
Yes. In terms of whether we make the good decision or make the bad decision, yes. In the video, they talk about it as a cause and effect pattern, and we see that expressed through all of the individual proverbs that are carried through the book. It's not only that there's a cause and an effect, but that it is what? It is inescapable. In other words, you can't modify the terms. None of us can modify the terms. That's God's domain. He gives it to us. What we have to do is decide, will we comply or will we rebel? And that brings us back to the universality of the moral laws that are presented as God defines wisdom for us. Good.
Go back,
Yeah, go ahead.
how is the phrase fear of the Lord defined in the video? I blanked out on the video, unfortunately.
That's okay.
But, when the word fear of the Lord is brought up,
Mm-hmm.
from my background, growing up in a Catholic country
Yes.
back in the 60s and 70s,
Right.
fear of the Lord, I have a certain perception of fear of the Lord, even to this day. When I see or hear fear of the Lord, it is very much
Okay.
is
What?
what it brings. So I would love some other words
Sure.
to define that word.
Okay, so we're coming back to that phrase, fear of the Lord, with the comments being made, the observations being shared of depending on the church culture you were raised in, fear of the Lord could have been presented in many different ways. And whereas we emphasize here and defend it from a scriptural context, fear of the Lord is again defined as a healthy respect and honoring of the Lord God and his laws and the wisdom which he provides for us, trusting that what he says is what's best for us. That's not always how fear of the Lord has been taught and used. And that sometimes it has been in the doctrine given a fearfulness, which is, can you see that that's a completely different thing? That's where you tremble in your boots. That's where you're afraid to approach, that awesome God because he's too awesome. Do we see examples of that in any of the Old Testament? Okay, I see some heads. Can you give me an example of where that kind of fearfulness is really what is described here? Good. We go back to the book of Exodus. You have Moses who wants to see God but is prevented because he can't deal with it. But more specifically, when he goes up the mountain, and this mountain is God's presence is there. That the book describes, Exodus describes this as a mountain. I mean, there's clouds, there's thunder, there's lightning. And originally it's like, yeah, bring the people up. And the people are like, nope, not going there. You go, Mo, and when you come back, if you come back, you tell us what it was all about. So there was a definite, there's a great example of a fearfulness of God. Okay. Where and how? Because we are in the Old Testament, and it does tell us to fear the Lord but not be fearful of the Lord, although we do see examples through the Old Testament of his judgment being exercised vigorously on disobedient people. Where does this come to its full expression where we can have this healthy respect and be to have fear of the Lord without being fearful of the Lord? Where do we see it come together as we move through the Bible? Okay. When we get up to the cross, when we get to that gospel message of the completion of the salvation plan, where God's Son fulfills everything that was needed, to grasp that and take that and understand that, there should be no fearfulness. There's pure joy, Mark.
So Dan, the best way I've heard it put is reverence. Instead of using the word fear, it's reverence.
Okay.
Because the moment we have that reverence that God is God Almighty, we have nothing but reverence for him. The reverence of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge.
Okay, good. So in this application of the word fear, the synonym is reverence. Think of it as reverence. Yeah, I think that's the context we want, Louis.
The other thing I also would like to remind us is that in the Hebrew language, there's more than one word for fear.
Okay.
So in English, they're all translated as fear, but the definition is totally different. I just have 3 right here in my book, but I'm sure if you look at a big concordance, you can find many.
Okay. So the observation being made, if you do a language study through a concordance of the English word fear, just like we see in Greek with the word love, you will not get one word fits all, like it's utilized in English. So you'll have different words, and you would have...
That's what she had to do. Reverence for
A reverence or an awe. Is what?
There are others that call it terror.
But
So
that's
it
the
still
New,
says fear, though, when you come
but
to
it's
it.
the New Testament, New Testament.
And it's still, so, yeah.
Okay. But that's the direction we're called to go in, is fear not in a fearfulness, but fear in a reverence. Bring it closer to home. Look at our own our family dynamics in our own, households. Should children fear their parents? Yes.
To a point.
Should in a healthy home, should they be fearful of their parents? No. I think we would all say no.
So you were a police officer.
No, I wasn't. All right, yes, I was.
Would you want me as a citizen to fear you, or, and by virtue of fearing you, hide and run away? Or would you rather me have reverence for you? Right?
Sure.
Respect.
Sure. So the question is coming up, which has nothing to do with me. In our society, the authoritative presence that we do have in terms of police, in terms of our leaders of whatever scope they may be, and yes, bringing it home to law enforcement, because that was my background, the question to me was, as an officer dealing with the public, do I want the public to fear me as in tremble and run away from me? That's not a healthy dynamic in a society. Do I want them to have a respect for the job I'm doing, the authorities of society that I'm representing? Yeah, because when there isn't a reverence for that, forget the person in the uniform, it's the uniform and what it represents. If there is not respect for that, we got problems. Watch the news. We have problems. Merle.
No different than a parental. You don't want to show them to fear you. You want them to respect you.
Right. Right.
And your word being, when you correct them, or your word to them, is not necessarily a law, but is experience showing what they go.
Okay. Yeah, so bringing it back into our homes and our roles as parents, which many of us can identify, and as children, which all of us can identify with, the healthy family dynamic, healthy meaning there is peace in the house, there is a nurturing environment where children can grow healthy and confident and be bold enough to step out, is when there is a reverential fear of the parents. Fear meaning the child recognizes, this is not my peer, this is my authority. Okay? You've got a better thing going. You don't want fearfulness, because that is such an unhealthy dynamic. And it's going to undermine the growth of a child. Well, God is our Father, right? And the idea of what we as parents try to bring to our children in raising them is our experience base. Within that house, within that context, yeah, they don't get to question it because they don't have the maturity level to reasonably question it. They have to, if we say it, that's it. And they need to understand that is a reverential fear of the authority. Well, God is the authority over everything. We are His children. We are His creation. So to have a reverential fear is a healthy thing. Because, well, let me ask you this. Between a reverential fear and a fearfulness, what does it play off of? What does it tell us about the parent that will give us one or give us the other? Love.
So if a parent shows their child love, when that child needs to scold them, that child won't be fearful. But if all you're ever showing the child is fear,
Right.
then they will run away. And the same with God. When you know God's love, you're not fearful of Him. He loves us so much. I would have no fear of Him.
And especially now in the time of the cross and the time of grace. Other comments?
Well, what he's really trying to do is correct us.
He's trying to correct us. Why? To keep us in place?
He loves us and he knows our final destination.
Because when a parent in love corrects, what is the outcome to the child? It's for our good. We grow. We learn. Okay? If it's a beating for the sake of a beating, that's not love. You know, forget this is going to hurt me more than you. Nobody's going to buy that one. So it's what comes out of the heart. Jane. If you love, you respect, and if you respect, you love. That's a good observation. Yeah, Laura. Oh, good. When we say we're revering, you can't really do that without, the observation is, meditating on the attributes of God. What is he like? And when you learn that from what's presented to us in his word, the natural outcome is reverential. Again, if our heart is right and wants to be obedient. If our heart wants to rebel, our perception and our perspective is going to be different. And that's, like in the garden, what Satan will try to entice us with, is that desire to do what we want to do, woven into that human nature and the sinfulness of it, right? So we as Christians, as people who have believed and accepted who and what God offers us, like Paul says in the New Testament, we enter the ring. We're constantly going to be fighting between our new nature, our Christ nature, and our old nature. Like I said, there's old tapes. I don't know if you got them. I got them. I got to keep trying to get rid of them, but every morning I wake up, they're still there. And Paul says, I fight the fight every day. Well, so do I. Maybe you can relate to it, because there's two natures there. Okay. Anything else on this before we move on to Ecclesiastes? Okay, Marilyn, Ecclesiastes?
We're exploring 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And they're all asking the question, what does it mean to live well in this world?
So we've looked at Proverbs, who you could think of as a bright young teacher.
She's all about pursuing wisdom, an attribute of God that's woven into reality. And she's optimistic that if you use wisdom, you will build a successful life.
But then we come to Ecclesiastes, who's more like this sharp, middle-aged critic. And he says,
You think using wisdom will bring you success. You'd better think again, because life here under the sun is meaningless.
And that's a phrase he uses a lot in this book.
But to understand this book, we have to realize first that we're hearing 2 voices.
So first there's the teacher, and we've been calling him the critic. He's the main voice in the book.
But he is introduced to us by another figure, the author. And he's the one who's collected the critic's words, and then at the end of the book summarizes everything and gets the final word.
So why does the author want us to hear from the critic?
Well, he wants to turn your view of the world upside down, and he's going to let the critic explore 3 really disturbing things about the world.
And we should warn you, these are pretty intense.
Yeah. So the first is the march of time, or as the critic says,
Generations come and generations go, but the earth, it's been here long before us and will be long after. No one remembers people from long ago, and all the people yet to come, they too will be forgotten by those who come after them.
So on a cosmic scale, you and I, we are just a blip. Stars are born, and then they die and form planets which orbit new stars, and those planets, they change over time and eventually burn up.
And amidst this cosmic backdrop, my entire existence is like a blink in time.
Which leads to the critic's second disturbing observation, that we are all going to die.
Humans face the same fate as the animals, death. All people, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, those who offer sacrifices to God and those who do not, they all share the same destiny. All this activity and madness, then we all join the dead.
Man, this book is depressing.
And so is the final disturbing thing for the critic, and that is life's random nature.
So in Proverbs, life isn't random. There's a clear cause and effect relationship between doing the right thing and being rewarded.
But the fact is that life doesn't always work that way. The critic has observed a glitch in the system. He calls it chance, or in his words,
The race doesn't always go to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food always come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the educated. Time and chance happen to them all.
So his point is that you can't really control anything in life. It's just way too unpredictable.
So if I want to master life,
Then you're setting yourself up for a fall. Now, throughout the book, the critic uses a metaphor to tie together all of these disturbing ideas. Nearly 40 times he says that everything in life is hevel. It's a Hebrew word that means smoke or vapor. Like smoke, life is beautiful and mysterious.
it takes one shape, and before you know it, it takes a new shape.
And smoke looks solid, but try and grab it, it'll slip right through your fingers.
And when you're stuck in the thick of it, like fog, it's impossible to see clearly.
Now, our modern translations have lost the metaphor, and they usually translate hevel as meaningless. But if you read closely, the critic isn't saying that life has no meaning, but rather that its meaning is never clear. Like smoke, life is confusing, it's disorienting and uncontrollable.
So, what are we supposed to do with all of it?
Well, surprisingly, the critic first of all acknowledges the perspective of Proverbs. He says it's a really good idea to learn wisdom and to live in the fear of the Lord.
Really? I mean, he just said that doesn't guarantee success.
But he knows it's the right thing to do. But secondly, and more often, he says that since you can't control your life, you should stop trying. Learn to hold things with an open hand, because you really only have control over one thing, and that's your attitude towards the present moment. Stop worrying, he says, and choose to enjoy a good conversation with a friend, or the sun on your face, or a good meal with people that you care about.
The simple things in life.
Yes, and both the good things and the bad, because both are rich gifts from God. And that's the surprising wisdom of Ecclesiastes.
Listening to the critic is painful and can lead you into some dark places.
And that's why the author speaks up at the end of the book. He doesn't want you to lose hope. He wants to make you humble into someone who trusts that life has meaning even when you can't make sense of it, that one day God will clear the hevel and bring his justice on all that we've done. And so he tells us that the proper response to all of this is to fear the Lord and keep his commandments.
And that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, there's one more voice in the Bible's wisdom literature, and that's the book of Job.
And he will bring us the final, much needed perspective on our journey into wisdom.
The book of Ecclesiastes. Now first, as I kind of mentioned through here, the literary technique that is used is to have basically two different persons speaking in the book. But keep in mind, there's one author. Okay, that's a literary technique that they use. The teacher, or here they're translating it as the critic, is the main voice, and then there's like a counter voice in there, but it's the same author. And as I said when we started, the author of both Proverbs and Ecclesiastes is King Solomon. Both books are dealing with wisdom, but both approach it in very different ways. How do we account for one author writing two books about the same subject that almost seem like they contrast with each other? They contradict each other. How do you work with that, Orla?
Well, our
Okay. It's a good question. How far apart in time, or in this case, the life of Solomon, were they written? And I don't think there's a definitive answer, but the study notes that I have do suggest Proverbs, a much more optimistic look at life through the perspective of wisdom, was probably written earlier in his life. And Ecclesiastes, definitely a little bit of a darker, cynical look near the end of his life. Now, what we know of his life, would that correspond?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Because he'd done everything he wanted to do, and that he was finally at the point of frustration.
Okay. Good way of putting it. If you remember the story of Solomon, he starts in a really good place in terms of his relationship with God, because when God asks him, what do you want? He says, wisdom. Doesn't go for bigger home, more money, or anything like that. He goes for wisdom. And because of that, he was blessed. God gave him wisdom and the wealth that he didn't ask for, and the riches. And he's referred to as the wisest man ever, right? But as we go later on through life, what do we see in the life of Solomon? Does he stay on that good, godly, faithful track? He really doesn't. He becomes very fixated in his role as king. He becomes very fixated on his opportunity to have relationship. He marries many, many, many women. All right? And what's more notable than that is he's marrying women outside of the house of Israel. He's marrying foreign women with foreign religions and foreign gods and foreign ideas. And he's seriously influenced. He's incorporating all of that into his own life. He compromises his relationship with God. And things start to take a downward turn by the end of his life. And so if he wrote Proverbs, this very optimistic look at life through the perspective of wisdom early, and Ecclesiastes later, that would account for these different perspectives that are presented. And they say that there is a word which is used 40 times or better in this book, which is kind of the continuous go-to theme of this whole book. And its life is what? Meaningless. And if you're looking at a King James, it'll say vanity. All things are vanity. All things are meaningless. Okay? And that's his theme in here, okay? And again, with the suggestion that this was written later in his life, the notes that I have in my study Bible describe the book of Ecclesiastes as Solomon's analysis of life's experience, kind of like what Ruth said, all right? A critical essay about life's meaning. And look at question 3. The word in the original language, they tell us, is hevel. So what is the word used? It's hevel, translated as meaningless or vanity.
But again, they corrected it, right? It's not meaningless.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. We're going to clarify things here as we move along. But initially, the word we're given is in our translation is meaningless. Life is meaningless. Starting with that precept, okay, the rest of question 3, what kind of words would you use to describe the world view that Solomon is putting forward here? Give me some descriptive words. For the world view that Solomon is presenting to us based on his use of hevel. Hevel we know translates as meaningless. What is it? When you read the book of Ecclesiastes and this meaningless, 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 give me your descriptive words for what the world is like that he's describing. Not optimistic or pessimistic, Laura. Depressing. Let me check out now. I want to get off the ride. Worthless. What's the point? This is what he starts out repeating and repeating and repeating. It's all worthless. It's all meaningless. There's no point. Okay? And it's that conclusion, that negative and pessimistic, hopeless, futile, deals with everything in life, including what? And the reference you would look for is chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Everything is meaningless. So if it's everything, it includes what? What kind of literature is this we're looking at? Wisdom. Even wisdom is meaningless. Yes, sir.
He also states under the sun that it's all meaningless.
And we're gonna clarify that as we move through. But yeah, that's a good observation.
So, if you're to detach God from creation and try to live life in any kind of wisdom, the critic is very right.
Good. And I'm going to hold that thought because we're going to progressively get to that conclusion. So just hold that thought for right now. But yes, that's exactly where we're coming to. But before we get there, they go on in here as they're introducing Solomon's theme and his worldview at this point. You look at question 4. They gave us specifically three meaningless aspects of life. What were they? What was the first one? Say again, Orla? Okay, so it's the march of time, the idea and ultimately that life, meaning each of our individual lives, is a blip. It's a blink and it's gone. And they go through this by saying the physical world, the creation, was there long before people ever walked on it, and it's going to be there long after we are done. Okay? Doctrine at the time. Now, we progress with doctrine as we go through the book, so just keep it in the context of where Solomon is at the moment. And so, therefore, if that's the case, if it's there before us, it's there after us, our life is but a blip, what does that do in valuing our individual lives? What can we say about each? What is our individual lives worth? Nothing. We're right back to why bother? And then we come to the next one. The second meaningless aspect of life, as Louise just said, is everybody dies. I said, this is just, let me have another cup of happy for this book. It just gets lower and lower and lower. And he makes the observation, all created life, human, animal, and we know from our own, the advancement of science and our study of things, throw the plant life in there too. Anything that lives in this creation only lives for a certain amount of time, and then it's done. Okay? I'm looking out the window at the beautiful garden I had all summer, thinking, time to yank it all out because it's dying. And it's going to die. And now it's just clutter, so I got to get it all out. But it looked great this summer, gave me vegetables, made pretty flowers, did all this good stuff. Now it's done. We all got our lives, right? And none of us know how long they're going to go. But we got it until we're here. Or we got it while we're here, and we have it till we're gone. And when we're gone, we're gone. We used to think it's like, okay, if every one of our lives was a book, and the book is different for every one of us, but the last chapter is the same. And then they died. And where we get so far with Ecclesiastes, that's pretty much what he's proclaiming here. Everything dies. So again, he comes back to, what's the point? All people, same destiny. Okay? Whether you're righteous or wicked, good or bad, wealthy or poor, faithful or a non-believer, Everyone ends in the same place. Whatever we do or don't do with our lives, we all end up the guest of honor at the funeral. Does it? So, again, why does it matter? Why bother? And what's the third meaningless aspect of life? Random. Throw the dice. See what comes, see what doesn't come. This Powerball up to $1.2 billion. Throw the dice. Dollar in a dream, right? Here in Ecclesiastes, they present that life is unpredictable. What can we control? Nothing. So stop trying is where we're going to get to. But right now, he's not making that leap yet. I wish he'd come a little sooner with it. But you hope that this is a book you hope people will read all the way to the end. Don't read the first few chapters and stop. Don't walk away there. Read it to the end. But we don't control anything. And then they introduce the idea of the Hebrew word hevel, which is a metaphor for what? That we translate as meaningless? Or what we translate as meaningless or vanity, but the original word, they say, was a metaphor for something.
Life is just not clear.
A smoke or a vapor, coming to the conclusion that it's not clear. And you think, I don't know how, if you were up early enough this morning or anything. Anybody look out the window here in the first light there? Try and drive to work, right? Fog, thick. Literally, that description. And this morning wasn't quite like that, but it was funny because I could look from my house out and I could see the street until someone came through with the headlights, and I couldn't see anything until the truck went by. So this idea of smoke or vapor or fog looks like a solid wall. Till you try to grab it or contain it, and then it just disappears in your hands. It can, smoke especially. It shifts. It has one shape here, and then in a moment it looks different. It's there, then it's gone. You can see it until it surrounds you. Then you can't see anything, right? And this is the idea of this hevel, this abstraction. Okay. And as the comment was made a little bit ago, this idea of hevel, this idea of meaningless, is not without meaning. It's unclear meaning. Merle.
All of us are here meaningless. What about all the names in there?
So all of us meaningless. What about the names in the Bible? We're going to answer that question in just a minute. You just. As a matter of fact, I want you to hold that book up till we get to the end. We're going to answer that question. We're going to come to the comments of the gentleman in the back here before we finish the book of Ecclesiastes here. So it's unclear meaning. So this idea of meaninglessness is more the idea of something that is confusing and disorienting and, again, uncontrollable. You can't contain or direct, this ambiguousness. All right, look at question 5. So that's what we've gotten from Ecclesiastes so far, and it's basically let me off the ride because this is no fun. But as the book progresses, the world perspective that is presented begins to change. Now we'll come to what some of you have started to comment. How does it change? As we move into the latter parts of the book. Now come with what you were saying. Okay. Good. Good. That's good. That's real good. So it's the idea of the clarification is everything is meaningless under the sun. So there's an expression put in there and an emphasis put in there that says what? Life is meaningless when what? We limit it to a life without what or who? God. Life. So what Ecclesiastes ultimately is saying, what the author clarifies from the critic as we reach the end, is that life without God is meaningless. And again, now we come back to what Proverbs introduced us to with the idea of wisdom, wisdom being an attribute of God. So life without wisdom, life without God is empty, unfulfilling, hopeless, meaningless. And the conclusion, as they work through the latter part of the book, is, and because the author doesn't retract anything or contradict anything he's already said, he just starts to clarify it. So when he said, gave the impression earlier, you can't control life, so don't bother trying, here is where he gives us the rest of it. No, you can't control it. So don't try to control it. Don't beat your head against the wall trying to control what is out of your control. Instead, and the suggestions that come through wisdom, is live in appreciation of the moment, which is another way of saying what can we control in anything we deal with in life? Ourself, specifically our attitude. So now, if we talk about life with God, with the wisdom that is an attribute of God, doesn't change our ability to control anything, but it changes how we respond to it. Enjoy the moments. I have a chair. And yes, it rocks. And yes, it reclines, and I'm not ashamed. And I've got it positioned near a west window at my house. And whenever opportunity allows, and my wife might say that I allow too much opportunity, I like to sit in the chair when that sun is coming around in the latter part of the afternoon. And there's a time, because of the trees and everything, where it's blocked, and then it's clear. And it comes right through that window and shines right on my face when I'm sitting there. I came home from work today, and it was an earlier day, and I sat down to just kind of relax a little bit and prep myself for coming here tonight, and it was that time of day, and that sun came around, and it's like, everything's good. It was a moment. And we can enjoy those moments because I don't have to worry about controlling anything. I can accept the good things God has given. I can thank him for the good things he's given and appreciate it without stressing out about trying to control it. Which brings us to the idea of worrying. Because bottom line in Ecclesiastes is, don't worry about the stuff you can't do anything about. Go to the New Testament. Where else do we see advice about worrying? Jesus. Anybody know where specifically? Close. Okay, not Matthew 5, but Matthew 6, all of which is part of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 6, 25 through 34. I can't believe you didn't know that. I mean, I just pulled it right out like that. Matthew 6, 25 through 34 is the Lord himself teaching about worrying, saying, don't. Why are you doing that? All right? And you can read that on your own. So it's Matthew 6, 25 through 34. And another place is Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, where Paul says, don't bother worrying, but he gives us an alternative. What does he say to do? Anybody remember? Anybody know? Pray. Pray. Pray without ceasing. Because that's how we keep ourselves focused on the attributes of the living God. Okay, good. And then the rest of the story is what was already been said. Life is meaningless if it's apart from God. And the purpose then of this book is not to make us hopeless, but to make us what? Humble. Humble. It's calling us to humility. Okay?
So it's actually pretty interesting how Solomon wrote this, because as you mentioned,
Yeah.
So he actually penned what he experienced. That
Yes.
He had
Yes.
everything and he had none.
Right. Good. Even though he still had everything by the world's standards, inside he realized he had nothing. So yeah, if we accept the fact that this was written later in his life, inside he started to question everything because he had all the riches. He had the whole game. He was literally on top of his world, but he realized none of it means anything. What a waste of time. Okay? So he was, in effect, in the latter parts of his life, humbled. Okay? There is meaning, but just like the substance of smoke or vapor, it's unclear. And a lot of times in life, we can't make sense of it, so the alternative we're given is faith and trust. And we'll finish up there with 1 Corinthians, or I'm not going to go there, but a reference to the first book of Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 12, where Paul talks about our current life as being something like we're looking through a mirror. And I don't mean a really good mirror. I mean a lousy mirror. The image is a little opaque. It's a little distorted. It's hard to make out the features. But what does he say? That's how I see now. But how am I going to see one day? Crystal clear, as if I was looking face to face. And he's talking about with God. Because that's the promise laid out to all of us if we accept the salvation plan, right? And so then the final verse that ties it all together is at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verse 13, and you could add 14 to it also. Which says the whole point of this life is to fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. In other words, it's all in God's hands. Let it be in God's hands. What's our duty? To fear the Lord and to keep his commandments. Okay, so that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Let's finish up the Song of Songs. Well,
The Song of Songs. It's a well-known but not so well understood book of the Bible. It's 8 chapters of love poetry. And while there is an introduction and a conclusion, the book doesn't have any kind of rigid literary design, and that's because it's a collection of poems. They're not meant to be dissected or taken apart. They're meant to be read as a flowing whole and simply enjoyed. The first line of the book tells us that it's the Song of Songs, which is a Hebrew idiom like the Holy of Holies or the King of Kings. It's a Hebrew way of saying the greatest thing. So this is the greatest song of all songs. Then we're told in the first line that this Song of Songs is of Solomon, which could mean that he is the author. His name does begin the book, after all. But as you read the poems, you discover that the main voice is that of a woman called the Beloved. And while there is also a male voice, it does not seem to be Solomon's. Solomon is mentioned a couple times in the poems, but he's never a speaker. And you do have to admit, Solomon is a very odd candidate as the author of this book, given the fact that he had 700 wives. For the lovers in the Song of Songs, they are the only ones in the world for each other. So the of Solomon likely means in the wisdom tradition of Solomon. He was known for his wisdom, his poetry, his love of learning about every part of life. And Solomon became the father of wisdom literature in Israel. And so his legacy is here carried on through a collection of love poems that explores the human experience of love and sexual desire. The opening poem introduces us to the basic theme of this book. We hear the voice of the young woman who delights in her man, a shepherd. Now, she's not married to him yet, but it becomes clear that they're engaged and they cannot wait to be together. From the introduction, the poems flow back and forth from the woman's voice to the man's, shifting from scene to scene without any kind of clear linear sequence or storyline. The poems move in these symphonic cycles, and key images and ideas get repeated and developed. So, one of the basic themes uniting the poems is the intense desire that this couple has for each other, expressed through their constant seeking and finding. So after the opening poem, they're separated but on the hunt for one another. So the woman calls out, or she'll wake up from a dream or go looking for her lover, and more than once they'll find each other, they'll embrace, and then right when things start to get a bit racy, the scene will suddenly end, and a new one will start. They're separated, looking for each other, and on it goes. Another repeated theme is the joy of the couple's physical attraction for one another. So multiple times they'll pause and describe each other with these elaborate metaphors. And here it's very helpful to know that these images and metaphors in Hebrew poetry are not primarily visual. If you try and paint a picture of these people based on the metaphors, you will end up with something that looks very, very strange. What you're supposed to do is reflect on the meaning of these images as they relate to the man and the woman. So you'll read through the poetic cycles, and the tension will keep building in their desire and joy and attraction. And this spiraling repetition is a poetic way of heightening and focusing on the mystery and power of sexual love. It all comes together in the conclusion, which pauses to summarize what these poems are all about. Love is as strong as death. Its passions are as severe as the grave. Its flashes are of fire, a divine flame. Many waters cannot extinguish love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, he would be utterly scorned. The poem highlights the power and the intensity of love, how it's both beautiful but also dangerous. Like fire, love can destroy people if it's abused, or be life-giving if it's protected. Ultimately, love expresses the insatiable human longing to know and be fully known and desired by another. Love is one of the most transcendent and mysterious experiences in human life, and as a part of the Bible's wisdom tradition, this book says it's a gift from God. After this, there's an odd poem about Solomon trying to do what the previous poem just said was impossible, to buy love. The woman rejects Solomon's offer, and then the book concludes with the man and the woman. They're separate once more on the hunt for each other. He calls to hear her voice. She begs him to run away with her, and that's how the book ends. Just totally open-ended. But that's a lot like love, which never truly concludes, because there's always more to discover and pursue in your beloved. And so true love has no end, and neither does this book. Now, through history, the big question raised by the Song of Songs is, what on earth is love poetry doing in the Bible? There have been three main interpretations of this book throughout history. In Jewish tradition, it's been read as an allegory, each character a symbol. So the woman is Israel, the man is God, and their love is a symbol of the covenant between God and Israel made at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. This view flowed into the Christian tradition, but the characters were swapped. So it's about Christ's love for his people, the church. And this interpretation was inspired by Paul's words in Ephesians 5, that a Christian husband's love for his wife is a symbol of Christ's love for the church. What's interesting is that in the last 100 years, archaeological discoveries among Israel's ancient neighbors in Egypt and Babylon has turned up all kinds of ancient love poetry that's very similar in language and imagery to the Song of Songs. We see that love poetry was a meaningful part of Israel's cultural environment, which has led most scholars today to view the Song of Songs as what it presents itself to be, an arrangement of Israelite love poetry reflecting on the divine gift of love. But that doesn't mean that it's only ancient love poetry. There's a key feature of these poems that sticks out when you read them as a part of the Old Testament, and that's the overwhelming use of garden imagery. There are powerful echoes of the Garden of Eden and the idyllic scene between the married couple in the early chapters of Genesis. So the image of the man and the woman naked and vulnerable, but completely unified and safe with one another. This resonates in the background of the Song of Songs. It's as if in these poems we are witnessing the love of a couple whose relationship is untainted by selfishness and sin. And so ultimately the song holds out hope that even though our own relationships are so often distorted by selfishness, love is a transcendent gift, and it's meant to point us to something greater, to the gift of God's love that will one day permeate and transform his beloved world. And that's what the Song of Songs is all about.
Songs. And depending on the Bible you're using, it might be titled the Song of Solomon. It's the same book. They tell us in here, and if you read through it, you'll see it's a beautiful example of ancient love poetry. It focuses on the physical love between a man and a woman. It uses very intimate language, so much so that I would encourage you to read it in private. And I'll tell you, I will not stand up here and read that book to you. I would find that very awkward and embarrassing. That's the kind of literature that it is, okay? Youthful love, physical love, lustful love, all very relevant to the human experience. But let me start by asking you, why is it in the Bible? That's where we're supposed to be on our good behavior and talking with God. Okay, this is the book that the original word translates something like hubba hubba. Why is it in the Bible? Well, God is love, but we're not talking about that kind of love. We're talking about the woman and the man that just can't be apart from each other.
I think God created us to be loving creatures for each other.
Okay, so to answer the question, why is it in the Bible, one observation is because God created this love. He created us. He made this attraction between the man and the woman. So that's one reason. But why else? I mean, I guess what I'm asking you is this genre of literature, this ancient love poetry, and it's poetry or songs. You know, you can't read it. No, you can. You can. You know, it's not meant to be a narrative story. So if you read it with that in mind, it may not flow well with you. Understand that it's a collection of poems. Yes, Suzanne.
Well, there, as it says, were different interpretations of what it actually meant.
Okay.
And then it also said at the end of that portion that was very representative of the way they spoke at that time. There were a lot of other poetry that they found.
Okay.
So
Okay.
maybe this is just the way they spoke, and again, with those different interpretations, maybe this is just the way they spoke.
Okay. All right. Perhaps this is representative of the best translation we have of the way they spoke, or at least the way they wrote their literature. And they did make the observation this ancient love poetry is not unique to the ancient Israelites. It's been found in both Egyptian literature and Babylonian of the time. So it's Near East cultural. Yeah, go ahead.
Representative of maybe God's, Jesus' love for his people.
Okay.
And they did say there are different meanings, could be different meanings to it.
Okay.
Not just for a man and a woman.
Okay, good. So we're going to work through, and a couple of you have said it and kind of hinted at it, that this love story between man and woman, and specifically a man and a woman, can be representative and symbolic. So we'll explore that. Yeah. Good. Good. Right. Yeah. Okay. So if we consider the Bible, as we should, an instruction manual for being people, and specifically God's people, it's notable that it's here because what's it telling us about that physical love between man and woman? It's okay. God made it that way. He made us that way. Yeah, great observation. Within certain universal moral context and boundaries. But yeah, it's the idea that it's okay. And, you know, I mean, as I was, prepping this and watching this and preparing this study, I was thinking back to, some of the history of Christianity, over the eras and the centuries, and some of the movements that came out that, really vilified this idea of the physical attraction between man and woman. But it doesn't seem like they should. Like it's been said, and I think well said, God made us that way.
Well, sex also got a bad
Yes.
So it's God's way of saying, don't ignore the whole situation of sexuality, but put it in its right perspective.
Good, 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 good. So if we look at this Old Testament context in which this literature was written, we see a lot of ungodly representations of sexuality in other religions and other cultures and cultures that do not honor the living God. So yeah, we can take the fact that this is in here as God saying, here's the right way. Here's how I intended it. If we look at not only what's written, but as we come down and look at how it's can be seen as representative. So there we've answered question 6 with the idea of why it's in there. There is good legitimate reason for this, and in this idea of physical attraction and the love between a man and a woman, that physical desire, extrapolate that to a bigger concept of what's going on, is that drive in us is a desire, it's a human longing to know and to be known. In that proper physical, intimate relationship between man and woman, there's a validation of self, isn't there? If it's done well and done in a godly way and done in a healthy way, it satisfies our desire to know and to be known. Relationship. Okay.
Do God really want man and woman to have pleasure in each other as they would have pleasure with loving God?
Okay. So again, we see the representative idea of the love of man and woman being a pleasing, a pleasureful expression, and see that as symbolic of God's desire in his relationship with us. Again, we're coming back to, are we supposed to be fearful of him? Is he the raging, thunderous, Zeus on Mount Olympus? No, that is not our God. And yeah, so we see a relatable representation if we bring it down to what we all have for a drive to know and to be known and to have relationship and the physical desires, and to look beyond that. So it takes us to a point where the idea of love is encapsulated and understood, one, as transcendent and mysterious. Nobody's going to argue me on that one. But specifically that it is a gift from God, and the idea that love is not finite. Love doesn't end. Okay? And I mean, you can see, in even secular, counseling of marriage relationships. I mean, one theme that they will constantly come back to is, especially if it's a counseling session where there's been several years of marriage and people get in a slump and it's like, no, the love, you've got to keep the love alive. Okay, even secular counselors will advocate that, but here we see in a biblical scope, from a godly message, love is without end. And again, it has to be that way for our relationships with each other to sustain and survive and go the long haul. But it's also representative of our relationship with God and how he wants it with us. His love never ends. There's no ending to it. Okay?
How often in some songs that they separate,
Mhm.
right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, this constant hunting, the constant,
The seeking, yeah.
absolute excitement, and then the separation again.
Right.
I was just reading there, where she went out looking for him because he was suddenly gone.
Yes.
And she was found by the night watchman who beat her.
Yes.
And so it's
Back to the police again.
a lot of, a lot of visual, a lot of fantasy thought
Yes.
process, which to me shows the strength and the power of sexuality.
Good observation,
If it
Ola. Yeah.
wasn't this powerful, we wouldn't have the mess that we have the mess.
Sure, absolutely. Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, great observation that in the way the book is laid out, the sequence of poems and the collection of poems, is we don't see the couple coming together and living happily ever after. They're together, and then they're apart. And there's this constant seeking, this constant looking for each other. And then they're together, and it's great, and then they're apart. And she's out at night when she's not supposed to be out looking for him. I'm taking it there was maybe a curfew set up in town, and she's out when she's not supposed to be, and the night watchmen, they treat her harshly. You know, you're not supposed to be, you're supposed to be home, right? But she needs to find him so badly, she's going beyond, you know, in putting herself in personal danger to find, so that it's that power of love, it's that power of the desire that, and the transience of it. You know, we have it, then there may be a separation. And again, the idea that you can't coast in a relationship, right? I'm sure we can all associate with that. You have to keep intentionally putting yourself forward to keep it alive, to keep it fresh and vibrant, right? Because if you take it for granted, things go wrong. Okay? And in terms of the seeking, another great analogy, she seeks him, her lover, the subject of her love. How does that seeking play into that greater sense of not the love of man and woman, but when we bring God into it and his love? Where's the theme of seeking come in? We should be constantly seeking God, but what else even trumps that? How about God comes looking for us? God didn't make us go find him. You know, look at the analogy in the New Testament of the 99, the shepherd with 100 sheep, 99 are with him, one gets lost. He goes to find the one. We're that one. Because his love never ends.
Everything you just described is really the relationship between man and God.
Yes.
What you said about going to the night watchman, that really is going to the devil.
Okay.
Walking away from God.
Yeah.
That's the whole story of this.
It really is. It's very representative of us in our relationship with God, which comes down to question 7, the 3 historical interpretations of this. Okay, the first one, in the Jewish tradition, this is an allegory for the relationship between who? Israel and God. Okay, in the Christian tradition, it's an allegory for who? Christ and the church, and the love that Christ has for the church. And if you want to read a New Testament passage dealing with that, you can look at the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 5, verses 25 through 33. And the third interpretation, historical interpretation, we've already alluded to a little bit, that it was this type of language and literature was part of Israel's cultural environment, not just within the nation of Israel, but within that Near Eastern world of that time, the Egypt, the Babylon, that whole area knew this type of literature and had their own versions of this type of love poem literature. So, and as you've all correctly stated, this book is really a collection of Israelite love poetry, specifically reflecting on the divine gift of love, God's gift of love. Okay, and it's represented here with the woman and the man as a relationship that is untainted by selfishness, untainted by sin. It is pure. It is honest. It's okay. And she just desires to have the connection with the one she loves so strong, she goes to all means to get it, and when there's a separation, to get it again. And this is representative of the Garden of Eden before the fall, the way God originally intended it and created it to be. So we should take out of this Song of Songs that love is a divine, a God-given, God-originated transcendent gift. Transcendent meaning what? It overcomes, or it comes above what? Transcends what? Everything. Any other aspect of this life that comes to us that we can pursue, that we can seek, anything else is secondary to love. Love transcends it all, right? Again, say again?
When they mentioned the Garden of Eden, I actually thought of the garden of Gethsemane, which demonstrated God's love.
Okay.
Everything else.
Okay, good. I mean, there's a they talk about the Garden of Eden, but Mark brings up a good observation. We can also look at the Garden of Gethsemane, where love plays a tremendous part in all of that. Yeah, good. And again, that divine love, that divine gift of love. So it transcends, and it makes me think of the verse. Is it in 1 Corinthians? I'm not even sure. Where Paul talks about faith, hope, and love. Is that 1 Corinthians? Yes? Okay. Faith, hope, and love. He goes, he describes and everything, and then he says, and the greatest of these is what? Love. Love transcends. And that's represented in this Song of Songs. It is a work that points us to something greater than what? Greater than this worldly life, this secular life, this physical life, but it points us to God's love, which transcends all. And what's his promise of salvation? We will transcend. Through him, through that gift, through his son, through Gethsemane and the cross and the empty tomb, we will transcend what? What's the promise? Death. Thank you, Orla. Death. We will transcend death. That's the promise. That's reflected in this book. Final comments or questions? Okay. That finishes, as I said, the poetic books. Next week, we move into the prophecies, and we're going to get acquainted with Isaiah and Jeremiah. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for your words. Thank you for this study. Thank you for everybody that came and all that have participated. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you most for your love and for your wisdom, but mostly your love, because you demonstrate and you assure us that it will and does transcend everything, and you come for us because we are the objects of your love. We are grateful for that. May we go forward with that in our hearts, bold to be your witnesses in Jesus' name. Amen. Good job tonight. Thank you.